This week on the Sports Initiative podcast, I sit down with multi-format rugby coach Damian McGrath. He discusses his transfer between codes, starting off in Rugby League, going through Rugby Union, and currently working within the Seven setup, some of the elite environments he's been within, including Leeds Rhinos and the England Rugby Union side under Sir Clive Woodward, as well as the current challenges he faces within the Kenyan Rugby Sevens setup. As always, if you enjoy this podcast, please make sure you share it with friends and family. I hope you enjoy. Damian, really appreciate you spending a bit of your afternoon with us or morning with us, or I don't know what it is time zone wise, but how are things your end? All okay?
Very good. Yeah, I've just come back from 5 beautiful days in Diani, which is on the coast of East Africa. So I'm feeling very happy and relaxed.
Yeah, I can imagine the weather out where you are is a bit better than it is over here as well. So I imagine you
Yeah,
enjoyed the sun.
Nairobi, where I live. Funnily enough, it's the rainy season. It's been wet and cold in Kenyan terms, but escaping to the sun for a few days was nice down to the coast.
A little bit of rain to make you remember home then. At least you got
Of
the
course,
home comforts.
yeah, can't shake
Um,
it.
for people that maybe don't know you, haven't come across you before, do you want to give us, I guess, a little bit of a whistle-stop tour of who you are, and then I guess a little bit of a journey of how you've got there with some career highlights which we can discuss later on?
Yeah, I mean, it may be showing my age because it's a long story. I'm currently I'm the head coach of the Kenyan National Sevens team that play on the World Series of Rugby Sevens, which, for those that don't follow rugby, it's a similar to the Formula One. It's a series of events across the world. There are 11 this year, and the winner, the team that gains the most points across the 11 becomes world champions. It's been a struggle for us this year where we're down towards the bottom for a variety of reasons. But the rugby sevens over the last few years has played a major part in my life. I'm from Yorkshire originally. I trained to be a teacher. I was a very poor professional rugby league player, but with a combination of my teaching background and obviously rugby, moving into coaching, although it didn't seem obvious at the time, was an obvious step. And I was player coach in the reserves for Batley in rugby league, and then I got this amazing opportunity to work for what are now known as Leeds Rhinos in Super League in rugby league, to head up their academy, newly formed academy. I was head coach of the academy, and all the great players of recent times in rugby league history seem to have gone through that, including someone who's well known to a lot of sports fans, Kevin Sinfield, who's done such a lot for MND over the past couple of years. As always happens, after something like 10 years, I worked my way up to being assistant coach of the senior team, and we won Challenge Cups at Wembley's, which was awesome, and we went to grand finals at Old Trafford. And I also had the opportunity to be assistant coach for Great Britain at the World Cup Rugby League World Cup in 2000, which was a fantastic experience. But there was a change of coach, and as always happens, it seems that the new coach brings his own people. And I made what at the time seemed a huge step to move from Leeds to London to work for London Broncos. For those people who can remember that far back, Sir Richard Branson actually bought London Broncos and populated it with lots of overseas Australian stars. And I was brought in to be assistant coach because the head coach was fairly new at the job, a bit like, which seems now as I feel as an experienced coach, but then it was for my young self to be an experienced coach to him. I had a great year there, but it seems bizarre now, but I was homesick and I thought, I've got to move back home. I can't, moving from Leeds to London seems such a big leap. And a great friend of mine called Joe Lydon, one of the all-time great rugby league players, had recently gone from rugby league to rugby union. It's a common thing now, but back then, in the sort of late 90s, early 2000s, he went to work for the rugby football union in the performance department. And he said that Sir Clive Woodward was looking to get some coaches in to help. They were going to start the sevens and to work on skills and defence with the different teams. And would I like to go? And I love a challenge. For such a shy person normally in life, I really thought the challenge was fantastic. But the deal clincher was, Joe said to me, you can live back in Leeds and just travel down for camps. I thought, oh, what a great thing. I'm thinking about it now. It was probably the last time I ever set foot in Leeds, because the life has taken me all around the world since then. But I worked on the sevens. I worked with England A, the England senior team, England under-19s. I had a fantastic 4 or 5 years. And also to help because although both called rugby, the rules and the nuances of the sport are so different. I worked at Leicester Tigers for 2 years as their skills and defence in their first team. At that time, Leicester were the all-conquering champions of Europe and England, and the whole team was big stars in rugby. Martin Johnson, British Lions captain, England captain, and when they won the World Cup. And so I had a brilliant experience there and learnt so much, while still working with the England representative teams. And again, as so often happens at the end of Sir Clive Woodward's reign, he moved on and the new guy come in, and results weren't as good, and they cleared out a lot of sort of England's backroom staff, and I was one of the lowly gang to get moved on. Another friend who I'd met during this time had taken over as head of rugby in Spain. I didn't even know Spain had a rugby team. My ignorance was such. But there are actually more registered players in Spain than there are in Scotland. It's such a big game there, and they got sponsorship and they wanted to lift Spain's position on the world standing. And I had 3 great years flying in and out of Madrid and working with the Spanish team, and it moved up 20 places on the ladder into the top 20. And but the opportunity came then to move to Joe Lydon again, a great friend. He was the head of performance in Wales, and I got an opportunity to go to Wales. And again, it was sort of to be based back in Leeds, but I could travel backwards and forwards. I ended up living in a caravan in North Wales with a couple of famous ex-Welsh players, Rupert Moon and Chris Sauceman, but which all added to the experience. But we had a great time in North Wales, building the North Wales rugby identity and establishing a professional setup there. When the lure of sevens came again, and a great friend of mine called Simon Amor, who's now head of rugby in Japan, rugby sevens in Japan, was appointed the England sevens coach, and he was his first major coaching role. And in a conversation, he just would I be interested in coming to help him and helping him steer the ship and working alongside him. And I'd loved sevens the first time round. The opportunity to travel the world and see coach such high level players in such an intense sporting environment was too much to miss. So I went back and did a year with Simon, and then for a man that wanted to stay at home, I saw a job advertised on, of all places, Facebook, would you believe, where Samoa were wanting a new head of their rugby sevens program. For those that don't follow rugby, Samoa is a tiny island out in the South Pacific, but has a huge rugby reputation for such a small place, and they're seen as one of these sort of giants of the game alongside Fiji out that way. I applied for the job and forgot all about it, and a long story how I found the email in spam and asking me to come for an interview that lasted about 6 hours because the line kept dropping out. But anyway, I became the first non-Samoan to be appointed as head of the Samoan Rugby Sevens program. Almost 18 months there were just nothing like I'd ever expected. Samoa's you can drive around the whole place in 5 hours, and it only has 200,000 people. I thought it was a major country. So I was the only bloke on the island with white hair. I couldn't go anywhere. It was like being in a boy band, because rugby's the only game in town. It's the only thing. I was front page or back page on the newspaper every day for one reason or another. Everything that happened in rugby was big. So that was an incredible experience, both good and bad. And it ended badly, as they all do, because the Prime Minister was also the chairman of the board, and they were trying to get more influence, and I was keeping them at arm's length. And anyway, it didn't end as well as maybe it could have done. And I then moved to Canada as head of their sevens program. They're an established team on the World Series. We had a great time there. Won a leg of the World Series for the first time ever in Canada's history. And again, a change of regime in the background led to a change of coaches, and I moved to Germany just as COVID hit, and we had a little bit of success there. Germany, again, I had no idea Germany was a rugby powerhouse, but it's on the fringes of the big countries. It's a niche sport there, but based in Heidelberg with Olympic funding, and we had a really interesting time, and one that I really enjoyed for lots of different reasons. And then this opportunity came up in Kenya, and one of those things. If I'd have known then what I know now, I would never have accepted, because it's been a circus of. It would take me 3 books to write just what's happened in the last 12 months. It's been a crazy time, which when I sit back and talk to people about, everybody enjoys the stories, but actually living it's not been as good as it could have been. But that in a long nutshell has been my coaching career.
I think that everyone listening to myself will realise that we're going to struggle to do this in an hour. So we'll get through as much as we can. It might be something we revisit again further down the line. I think as a really nice starting point, though, and it doesn't matter kind of what form or what format you're playing in. For you as a practitioner trying to coach, how would you like to be perceived by your players? When you're coming into a new environment, what are the type of foundations you like to lay so they know you as a practitioner and your expectations and whatnot?
Well, I think everybody talks about culture, don't they, in sport? Particularly in the last few years, it's been at the front and centre. But I think to build a culture, the players have to trust in what it is that you're doing. So you need to be a craftsman. You need to know your stuff. You have to prove your worth in terms of your rugby knowledge and your skills coaching. But you also have to be a great salesman, because you have to sell your vision and dream. If you come into a successful team, what is it that you want to do that's going to help them continue to be successful? If you go to Samoa and Canada, were examples of places where the previous regime had almost ground them into the dust, and I inherited hangdog faces and people who were on the verge of walking away anyway. So I always like to be happy and smiling, and let's face it, we're doing something for a living that everybody would do if they could, and you'd do it in your spare time if you weren't being paid for it. So I always like to think that enjoyment, not fun, enjoyment, because I think there's a difference between the two. Enjoyment's a big thing, but also being a good salesman, taking them with you, because I had this. My philosophy is when all is equal, skill is king. You can make people stronger, fitter, faster. Everybody can do that. But the thing that always makes a difference is the skill level of players. And when when the pressure's on and when the big moments come, usually it's those people that can execute the basics, the foundations, will see through. And I always start all my coaching tenures with that. I work on the very basic skills, the foundations, and again, I suppose it's the same in any sport, whether it's football, cricket, rugby. You're coming in to tell established professionals, internationals, how to hold the ball, how to catch the ball. But if you can explain why and what the difference it'll make to their game and where it could take them, then that's I always find to be the key. So I think I mentioned earlier, I'm a natural introvert, very shy person, and standing up in front of people when I was younger, I'd rather throw myself off a tall building than stand up in front of a crowd and speak. But I always feel as a coach, you have to be almost like a performer in the West End. I don't mean going over the top, but you have to play a role. And whether you're doing a matinee for 5-year-olds on a Saturday afternoon or performing in front of royalty on Saturday evening, you've got to be given the best performance you can. And that to me is always selling your vision, your dream, and taking everybody with you. And, foundations are the basics I've found have taken me a long way, and the teams I've worked with. And I always like to do that.
Yeah, I think we'll come back onto that in a sec, because I think that's a really fascinating piece in terms of how you, I guess, portray yourself to the group, etc. Just linking back to what you mentioned around the skill element and that being, foundational of what you implement. If you're going into environment, as you mentioned, you go Samoa, Kenya, Canada, they've probably got different levels of what they've had exposure to, or type of coaching or type of skill that they can do, etc. What type of techniques are you teaching them? And I guess you mentioned the why and giving them the rationale, etc. So how do you frame that why for them? Because obviously you're going to have a longer term picture of what you want. You're also going to have experiential learning of working across formats with some of the best players that have played, in world rugby. How do you frame that why for, a Kenyan lad who's 20, who's coming into your environment and is like, oh, I know how to do that, and might be a bit more, hands off on it? What does that look like for you?
Well, even just showing people how to grip the ball, but it's not just showing people what to do. It's explaining to them, and video is a great thing that we all have access to now, even on our phones. But showing them what difference it can make. I always say to them, name me a famous player or a player you admire. The Samoans used to say Sonny Bill Williams, the famous Kiwi centre, because he did these fabulous offloads but when you broke the skill down, all he did was the same as they did, but they just did it consistently well. They did it better than they did. There was a fantastic example. A long time ago, when I was back in Rugby League, I worked as the liaison officer for the Kangaroos, the Australian Rugby League team that used to come over, a bit like the British Lions tours now, but they used to come over in the winter and tour for 3 months and play internationals. And I had a front seat with that, being the liaison officer for them, organising things. I organised an open training session in Castleford, sort of heart of Rugby League land. About 3,000 people came. It was 1990, I think it was. And that as the team came out onto the field, you can almost hear the notebooks, all the wafting as everybody turned the page over and licked their pencils, ready to write down, the key to rugby league life. And it started off with a simple square drill where they just moved the ball around a square, and it went out and it came back in, and the ball went low and it went high, and it got faster and it got slower. Really, top level skill. There was no mistakes. And there was 2 guys at the back of the stand, and one of them turned to his friend and said, "What do you think?" And his mate turned to him and said, "Bloody rubbish." He said, "We do that." And he couldn't understand that they were doing a square drill, all those years ago, that they actually do with their teams in training. They thought that the best players do something completely different. And that stuck with me, because the best players do the simple things very well. And that's always been the message I bring. If we're going to be better than we are, we need to improve the small things. If we can get our foundations in place, and you can always, I know your background's in football. My younger brother Anthony is the head coach of Essex in the county championship in cricket, and he's the same. The best players, Sir Alistair Cook opens the batting. They do the small things well. It's not the ostentatious drives and all the other. The best players do the little things well, and you can demonstrate that in many ways now with, as I said, with video, but also showing how skills can become more efficient, more effective, and that's always been the sort of the foundation of everything I do, because it makes such a difference to people's games.
And I'm working under assumption here, so if I'm wrong, please correct me. I'd assume that you guys work on a camp-to-camp basis, where they're not with you the entire time.
No, the sevens is a full-time setup.
Okay,
So it's a daily thing. But again, it's like everything. Trying to say to somebody, "I'm going to show you how to pass now." Everybody thinks they can pass, but it's amazing how you can change just by some simple biomechanics and helping people be more efficient, and therefore more effective. I don't know, in rugby particularly, in places like Kenya and Samoa, they're more physical. It's about athleticism as much as anything else, and they assume people can do the simple things: catch, pass, hold the ball properly. So in those places, it was easy to make a difference, in a big way. With England and even Canada to a degree, it was there were more subtle changes. There were players there who'd made 80 appearances on the World Series and had a vast experience and played at World Cups, and you have to bring them along as well as everybody else. But I've always found if you go for the more experienced players first, if you can bring them in, they'll bring everybody with them. So
it's interesting, because the reason I asked that question, because I'd imagine that if you had them on a camp by camp basis, like sending them off to do work would be interesting to see who engaged with it. But I think what you've kind of alluded to there is that actually, if you can get one of your big players on board, and a Sonny Bill Williams relates to him, or Tuolangi relates to him, and actually go, listen, you've got some characteristics that are similar, but if we refine these basics consistently and you engage with it, not only will you improve, but the whole team will see that that's what you're doing and come along with you.
But also, I mentioned knowing your craft as well, because if you have someone on a full-time basis, you've got to, it's how you deliver it as well. You've got to, the way you use your sessions and how you finish off those things, having games that relate to the skills that you practice, and just gripping a ball and those sort of things are you can do all sorts of things with those, and rebound nets and using anything you can find to help deliver the same thing in a different way each time, but always bringing it back to why it's important and where it can take you.
And how would you look to pressurize it? Because obviously, like you mentioned, you're going on a world tour. There might be situations where you're winning a game against the All Blacks, and one of those skills is going to be the difference between you guys gaining 30, 40 meters and being right up their end to them doing it. So how do you pressurize that in training so that they understand, that they're capable?
I mean, again, a lot of the games aren't always rugby games, because, how you hold a ball and knocking a ball out of someone's hands, the sort of thing you do I did with children back at school. You can use lots of playground games to develop what you do. And sometimes you get the perfect storm. With Samoa, we beat Fiji in one of the big world finals just before Fiji won the gold medal. And the winning try came from 5 simple basic skills that we'd practiced all year, where someone did the right thing at the right time. And it was, one of those like perfect posters that you could take with you and show that, that's all it took, because there's that whole thing about, there's no I in team. Of course there's an I will do the right thing to help my team be successful. We don't always get to score the try or kick the goal, but if we make the pass at the right time, or make it a pass that allows someone to run onto the ball, presents the ball, when they've been tackled in the right way at the right time. The little things that the people in the crowd don't see, and even on TV you don't notice unless you're looking for it, but the team get to recognise it. And I always make a big thing of highlighting those small essentials when we finish, because everybody always stops to highlight their own video on their highlight of what them doing something spectacular, but it's the small things I always get the team to celebrate, because those are the things that always make a difference.
Yeah, there's a nice example of that with the Miami Dolphins a year gone by. They had a new coach and they were particularly good at blocking with the wide receivers. And I think one of the journalists said, "Why are you so good at it, considering last year we were terrible?" And he said, "Because we hold value in it." He said, "We'll get up on a Monday after the game on a Sunday and show them clips of where we've done it well and tell people, well done." He goes, "So now we're placing an emphasis on it, which means that they're going to want to do it again." So I think what you're saying there is actually, whilst the try scorer might get that end bit, if you can almost emphasize the process of someone doing one of those techniques well, that allows you to show the emphasis that you're placing on it is well placed.
Of course, because you want players to invest. We've just talked about, I come along and say we're just going to work on the basic skills to start with. Not everybody can see the value in that to begin with, but how you sell it to them and how you portray what it is you want to do. If they see value in it for themselves, they'll invest their time and their efforts into it. So if you keep showing where it's important and how it's important and what it does for the team, and then everybody begins to see the value in what other people do as well as doing it themselves, then it has a great impact on the team.
And then one thing you mentioned earlier as well was around that, I guess, that salesman piece. And you mentioned around, needing to do that to get your ideas and stuff across. For someone who's introverted, how did you come around? I'm going to use character in a loose word because you need a level of being genuine so they can see that. But how did you get that character, that persona of going, right, I'm going to be capable of standing in front of a group of men and going, this is our vision of what we're going to try and get to, and I'm going to sell you on it, or here's some ideas I'm going to sell you on so we get engagement?
Well, I think I said about performance, and I've turned myself in. Although you have to be authentic, as you said, you can't. People will see through you if you've been something you're not. But like most people, I can perform in front of a crowd. I've even done some after dinner speaking, and something I'd never seen myself doing in a million years. And I love laughing. I laugh at everything. Humor's a great thing, and I make a joke of everything I can, not people particularly, but situations, and I'm happy to laugh at myself. And I find that it brings people, it gives people a relaxed view of things. They don't feel under the same pressure if you're not always on edge. And I value people. I always treat people as how I wish I'd have been coached as a young man. Where the coach was really interested in what I did and could see the value in what I could bring to the team. I do small things like before a session starts, when everybody's on the field warming up and doing things, I'll speak to everybody individually. I'll put my arm around them and something, whether it's, how are you today, or how's your wife, your brother, whatever it is. But I need everybody to know that I know they're there and I appreciate them doing it. And that seems to have been a theme. I mean, you can't blow your own trumpet, can you? I know that. But a couple of my most valuable things after all this long time in sport, I got a private message on Twitter about a year ago from a boy I taught in 1981 or something like that, which I'm sure was in black and white then. But just saying what a difference I made to him and the team, and how when they're all in their 40s now, maybe late 40s, when they get together, they still talk about it and what a difference I made and how I made them all feel as though they were important. And I thought, man, that's awesome. That's better than any cup finals or anything. And then when I left Canada, the team wrote me off their own back. No, I didn't ask them to. They wrote me a letter of introduction to anybody who might be wanting to employ a coach, and it said more or less the same thing. That I value people, and I make everybody feel as though they can contribute. And I didn't set out to do that, but that seems to be the way I do those things.
Yeah, and how do you manage that? I guess that relationship building to also the performance aspect. So if you look at it for your camps, obviously there's going to be an element of performance based, and if they're not performing, you're probably going to have to go back to a regional club, or you're going to call someone up to in their place. So how do you balance that act of knowing that you care and having relationships, etc., but also them understanding that ultimately this is a performance-based industry, and that actually if you don't perform, regardless of this relationship, and I do care about you, you're probably going to have to vacate the program?
Well, that was my biggest Achilles heel as a young coach, because I wanted to be liked. That was. It's still a weakness now. I hate people thinking badly of me, but it's something I developed over time, and I found that again, I got myself into more problems not being honest with people because I didn't want to hurt their feelings. Whereas if you set the standards early and people realize what it is you're looking for, and then if you're not selecting them, you give them your reasons. I always let them know that, I'm not expecting them to agree, but I have reasons. I haven't just done it on a whim. And I'll also give them a way back. This is what you need to do. I don't just say you're out because you haven't played well last week, which they probably knew anyway. But I say, look, these are the things you need to. I'll always have a way back for them. Even if it's someone who's going to leave the program, like you said, who's had a shocker or is obviously not of a standard, which I've had to do this year. You always have to have a reason, and honesty. Not necessarily blunt honesty, but honesty in how you approach it. I think lets them know that you value them, that you're not picking them now, or you're not selecting them for the squad at this time, but you haven't closed the door on them because you think they've still got things to offer. But these are the things they need to do if they want to get back in.
Yeah, I like that way back phrase for him, because it's something that resonates. Go, actually, this could be something that's short term, but here are some things to work on. In terms of the process in Kenya of talent identification, what does that actually look like? Because I'd imagine, in England, you probably can get videos, VO of every single game from under 16s up, and you're going to be able to get best bits on YouTube and stuff. I'd imagine probably the grassroots capacity is very different in Kenya. So what does that actually look like?
Well, I said to you earlier that things haven't gone well for a variety of reasons this year, and talent identification's one of them. There is no plan here, and modern sport, high performance sport, has to be supported by a system, a plan, and there is nothing here. It's still back to the days of plucking people from obscurity and expecting them to go, playing centre midfield at Old Trafford, against the champions from playing nowhere. And that's it's a big weakness here. That there's such a big jump between local club rugby and then being selected for something like the World Series of Sevens, which is highly professional and full of amazing athletes, and a lot of them with lots of rugby experience and IQ. The big weakness here is coaching. The coaching's not there. There's certainly amazing athletes who can run quick and are big and muscular, but their lack of coaching and game understanding is a huge red flag. And we have a small squad, and sometimes, as much as I'd like to leave someone out, you look around for what's going to replace them, and the drop off is too big. And it's down to finance as so much is here in Africa. The finances aren't fantastic, and the corruption that runs through society runs through sport as well, and it's something that needs to be addressed. Samoa is probably a better example because, again, not a very rich country, but they had such a well-organized village system where everybody who was of a standard was pushed to a regional group, and the regional group trained on a regular basis under the sort of microscope of the senior coaches. We knew who was coming through and who wasn't. But for Kenya, that doesn't happen. And you're right. There was a boy turned up at the schools championship last year and ran everybody ragged. Nobody ever heard of him before. A barefoot kid who'd come, one of those Cinderella stories from nowhere. And those boys are there, but then he's disappeared again now. Not into obscurity, but he's gone back to school, and the Kenyan Rugby don't have a handle on him, and
you need that pathway where they can filter down.
That was England. He'd already be in an academy or be, he'd be part of a regional setup. And there are so many things you could do to improve rugby here. It's about the basic ingredients are all here. All you need is a really well organised recipe to make it work.
Perfect. So I think moving on slightly, one of the things you mentioned earlier was around, I guess, having credibility in front of the coach, in front of the players, and knowing, I guess, the intricacies of the sport as well as knowing them as characters. And one of the things, I guess, that's resonated with me is how much you've moved around in terms of codes. Now, there'll be some people listening that will go, well, it's all rugby, it's catching a rugby ball and passing it and stuff. But I'm not going to pretend I'm a rugby connoisseur. I do like watching it, but I'm educated enough to know that it is very different in terms of how you play the game and some of the intricacies behind it. So my first question before we go down that rabbit hole is, how did you as a coach, I guess, upskill yourself around those intricacies? If you're coming from a league background, how did you learn about, the differences of going from the league type of defense to then having to deal with rucks and mauls to then sevens and all that type of stuff? How did you go around that process?
A little bit of it was learning on the job. But it's interesting you should say that, because even as a young rugby league coach, I played in the second division. I wasn't first division standard. So my first big job, as I said, was at Leeds, which is one of the the blue ribbon clubs of rugby league. And when I was appointed assistant coach to the first team, some of the biggest stars of the game were playing there, and I was, who was I to tell them, the little intricacies of the game and try and point out mistakes. And I found that if you didn't try to do too much too soon, that getting people to trust you, that you weren't looking to undermine them, you were looking to help them. And I always find that to begin with, being positive over the good things rather than looking for errors to try and point out and then improve on was a way forward. And I looked at that. I took that with me when I went into rugby union, because it seems such an obvious thing now, and there's such a big movement of coaches between the codes. But when I did it back in 2000, 2001, there was maybe 1-2 people had done it, and I was very much the enemy coming from one. It was only 3 or 4 years previously that if you went to rugby league, you were signed die from rugby union. You weren't allowed to take part. So there was still an arm's length feel with it. And I took that approach of, rather than throwing myself in and trying to be a know-all and using my experiences from rugby league, which have been professional for such a long time, and trying to bring those in, I tried to take the same approach. I understood the game, so I watched the game, and the shape of the ball was really the only thing that was similar. The games are probably closer now than ever before, but back then the rules made it such a different game to play. And I looked for the things that I could help with rather than trying to bite off more than I could chew. And I found that, again, if you built a trust that way, it helps you with your credibility, and it also in your relationship with the players. Because I didn't even go in at the bottom end. I went right in at the top. I was at Leicester Tigers with all the great and the good, who were all playing for England, Scotland or Ireland at the time, and with England itself, all the established internationals, and they're not going to take a know-all who knows nothing from rugby league, seriously. If I try to jump in with both feet, and I tried to help improve things in a small way using the fundamentals I talked about at the beginning, which transcended both sports. I used those to try and help build a credibility and and that I had a knowledge, and I was bringing my specific knowledge in rather than trying to be someone getting involved in things that he hasn't quite got a grasp of yet.
And to be honest, this is part of the reason why I started this podcast, because I felt that cross sports could learn a lot more from one another than we necessarily do. And actually, for me, going around and being able to steal ideas from people is proved to be really useful. I guess for you going into those environments, was there something in particular that you thought, this is a really obvious and easy win that I can pull across from my league knowledge that actually could help some of these players?
Well, I keep saying this about when all is equal, skill is king. It's amazing how the further up the ladder you go, people get away from the real fundamentals that the best players can do better than everybody else, and they're looking for bigger and sort of that bigger picture stuff, and they're talking about tactics and rather than technical elements. And I found that as good as some players are, they were still wanting in technical areas, and I could make a difference. And that's how I made a niche for myself to begin with, just in that, looking at improving people's basic skill levels, because they then, and like all good players in any sport, they can see a value in people who are making them better. Again, they'll buy into it because they can see what it's going to do for them. And I could get some, because rugby union was in its infancy in terms of being a professional sport. I could make a difference in the short term there and establish myself in something that wasn't being done by the rugby union coaches of that time. It's all been done now, but back then I could make a difference in that way, and that established my credibility in a way that maybe that you would think doing something big and flash would do, but I found that I could make a difference with the small things that people couldn't see, but the players themselves could relate to and saw a value in, and that's how I sort of sneak my way into give myself some credibility within that group.
No, I think it makes sense. Like simple things like how you protect the ball going into contact so that you don't knock it on. If you reduce the knock-ons within rugby union setting, stuff like that.
One of the biggest things that made a difference was how to carry the ball. You would think when you're in a sport like rugby where you get the ball and you run with it and try and put it down, how many people lose the ball because they can't carry it properly and hold the ball in the right manner to protect it and to also run efficiently with it. Yet in rugby league, it's such a day-to-day thing. But at that time in rugby union, it wasn't something that, and like I said, so often bringing those small things in, players can see an immediate difference and they can see a value in, I understand what you mean now. Because if you carry it properly, you can protect it, but you can also pass it properly because it's in the right place at the right time to do. You're not adjusting the ball in your hands, to get things in the right place. And everything, all the small things were always connected, and I could always make a connection between them to allow, even how you grip the ball, you never do it by the points, you always do it by the fat bit and why that is and what a difference it makes and what it allows you to do. The connection, once you sell it to people and show them the difference it makes, they're on board with it. And as I said, that was my sort of my gift at the time, was to do that rather than try and be a know-all who knew nothing. And but I found it works everywhere.
And then we've seen, particularly, I guess, over the last few years, a lot of cross-contamination of coaches going across formats and stuff. And one of the things that's probably been highlighted most to me, at least from the outside, is probably defensive coaches from rugby league going into union and having success. I guess from a purely outsider perspective, why is that? Why has it become such a common practice, and why do you think it's had a positive effect in terms of results for those coaches that have gone and done it?
Well, without undermining it's probably the easiest thing to organise defensively, because you can number off and explain it in a much more simpler way than attack, which is much more fluid and based on chaos, I suppose, in any invasion sport. And you want to be as chaotic as possible to make it harder to defend. But defensive organisation, I think, is an easy win without sort of downplaying what people do. But I think as a rugby coach, you can get your defence organised fairly quickly. But that, in my humble opinion, I'm not saying that everybody would agree with me, but I always found that was an easy. And yet, when I came into rugby union, that was what people wanted more of. Defensive. You're from rugby league, so it must be bring defensive organisation. And yet, rugby league has had a full-time defensive coaches for so long. It's the sort of the ingenuity of their attacks that make them. That makes rugby league so good, because you're against well-organised, well-set defences. How do you break them down? And I was always keen to bring that to rugby union. And you see it now in the Premiership in England and the Six Nations, some of the fabulous attacking rugby that's played that's straight out of rugby league playbooks. And the sort of the ingenuity that people bring to it now, and the creativity I think is a byproduct of that well-organised defences to begin with, because everybody brought a rugby league style defence in which almost suffocated the game. And then people have said, right, how can we beat that now? And their creativity and their, some very smart people are showing how it can be done and how exciting the game can look.
Yeah, I think it makes complete sense in terms of that, the simplicity of it and then the chaos side. I guess for you as a coach, particularly in sevens, how do you manage that dynamic between structure so the team knows what's going on, but also allowing players to use that creativity or a bit of flair, which might get you, an offload when you're not expecting it, or a pass or a kick that the average player may not see?
There's the thing with sevens coaching, I found when I first came in, that there were three types. There were the followers, the adopters, and the innovators. The followers just followed the agreed way sevens should be played, where everybody filled the field and they just threw long passes and tried to use all the space all the time. The adopters looked to see what the team that was winning on the World Series was doing at the time and adopted that way of doing it. Irrespective of whether it suited their players or not, they just did that. The innovators, and there are lots of them about now, are the ones who said, right, what players have I got? What is their skill set, or what's their unique selling point? And they built a game plan around it. And I've always tried to do that. I've been overtaken now by way better coaches than me. But if I give an example, when I went to Germany, everybody was 5'4", and you look at them on the World Series, they're all 6 foot plus big. But what I was trying to mean is they were a very small team, not particularly fast, but like lots of Europeans, they had great hand-eye coordination, and their skills level was very good. And they also, I'm not, again, it sounds like I'm stereotyping the Germans here. They were very good at following a pattern and like to be told what to do and how to do it. This is a structure and this is how we'll play. And they managed to, we finished fifth on the World Series during COVID. We got invited as an invitational team because Australia and New Zealand couldn't come. And we against all those professional sevens, we ended up finishing fifth on the series in Canada. And all we simply did, we played a game that suited our team. We weren't big, so we couldn't power people. We weren't quick enough to run around the outside, but we could outplay them, outmaneuver them, and the players had very good game understanding and game management, and they simply played a way that suited their skill set. Whereas I often see people just playing the way they think the game should be played, whether it suits their players or not. In Canada, we had a big, powerful team, and we played a power game, which in sevens seems ridiculous with all that space. But we found that if we the more power we used, the more it drew defenders in, the more space it created for our quicker players. And they're very simple things, but it always seemed to me so obvious, and yet so many people don't do that. They play a game that they think should be played, not one that suits the cattle that they have. And I suppose it'd be, I'm a huge Manchester United fan. It'd be me taking over at Manchester United and trying to play like Sam Allardyce did at Bolton. Maybe it didn't suit the team. Or again, I've got to be careful what I say. I'm coaching because I don't really understand it enough. But you've got to play to the players you have, and I always feel that's for sevens. That's so important.
No, and I agree with you. I think it's something that's really understated, because I think most coaches go, oh, this is my philosophy and how I'm going to do it. And actually you end up putting some square pegs and some round holes, and that's where your challenges come, where it's actually going in and going, okay, what have I actually got here? And okay, over time, my vision might be this, but in the immediacy, we're going to work on what they can do, which is, as you mentioned, their power running, or if it's, being a bit more direct in football, or if in cricket, it's, we're going to be really slow scoring, but we're going to be in for a long period of time, and we're going to win games that way, and being comfortable that you're not all going to have a Ben Stokes and Josh Butler that can go around whacking sixes left, right and centre. But I think it's a really understated point in terms of actually the assessment of your team is probably a really good starting position as a coach before you go in and say, this is what I'm going to do. Probably the last question, just I'm conscious of time for me, is something I ask everyone, which is, if I were to speak to your players, or your colleagues, how would you want them to describe you in 3 words, and why?
Someone who trusts people, because I feel trust is the key element to relationships and ultimately to a team. It's a strength and it's also a weakness. My wife said it's a big weakness of mine because I trust people too easily sometimes. But I feel if people understand that you trust them and you're not looking to undermine them, then you can get the best from them.
Perfect. Listen, Damon, really appreciate your time. As I said at the start of this, we definitely haven't touched on about 3/4 of your journey, so it might be one we pick up again. But I'm sure everyone, you've made a fan of the Kenyan Sevens team for everyone listening, and hopefully we can catch up again soon.
Fantastic. Really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Sports Initiative podcast with me, Michael Wright. Please remember to follow us on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram at the Sports Initiative Podcast, and share this podcast with friends and family. I'll see you next week.